Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. As a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions. I'm not here to slander anyone, but with that being said, let's get started. Tonight is a special edition of The Revealing, as I am going to release the member video I released about a week ago, but I'm going to do it in an unedited format. And I'm also going to include a recent video that I had released for members only about the group that is, in my opinion, responsible for what took place on King Road. So I urge you to watch the entire video. It's going to look like you've seen the initial part of the video, but I assure you, you haven't. In this one, I'm leaving it wide open for you. So I assure you, watch it all, and then when it's done, you're going to have a completely clear outlook on what took place in this atrocity. And then when the part that's important is done, I'm going to come back and I'm going to mention a couple of other things that really will enlighten you on my perspective of the case at this point. So sit back and enjoy. Okay, folks, here we go. The Moscow Unalivings by Pavarotti. Now, this all starts back with the Quad Cities Drug Task Force. It was the mission, mission statement. Mission of this task force is to operate an enhanced multi-jurisdictional task force to combat controlled substance offenses and prevent trafficking of these substances in the Quad Cities of Lewiston, Clarkston, Moscow, and Pullman. Member agencies work together and share information to identify those involved in the distribution, sale, manufacture, and possession of controlled substances in order to develop prosecutable cases against them. Now, who does the Drug Task Force consist of? Again, it's various prosecutorial entities, such as the prosecutors in the different counties, the judges. It also included state and local law enforcement as well as federal. This is where the FBI came into play, folks, and they're still there. They're still investigating. But also the state police, local Moscow and Pullman police officers are all part of the task force. Now, what is their modus operandi? What are they looking for? They're looking for people who have been arrested on minor drug charges, who they can then turn into informants and work their way up the chain, trying to nab the big fish, the big drug trafficking organizations. And they did that in this case. March of 2023, they took down the big drug trafficking organization, which is a drug ring that was tied to the Aryan prison gang, who indicted 24 federal arrests. It's up to 28 now, folks. Took over almost 2 million doses of F, 230 pounds of METH, were seized, firearms and firearm parts. But who was involved in this organization? Well, this was the Aryan family, a white supremacist prison gang. Now, the Aryan family encompasses many sects of the Aryan Brotherhood, and we're going to really get into that in this one. Now, this is how the operation worked prior to everything going sideways there in really September of 2022. You can see over in Seattle and Tacoma, that's where the headquarters of the Aryan Circle were. They were they were trafficking large amounts of narcotics to different areas of Washington. Well, you can go through, even up as far as Alaska. I mean, this was a big one. But we're going to focus in on our story here because our story is in Moscow, Idaho. But you can see the Aryan Circle up in Seattle and Tacoma would traffic the narcotics across Interstate 90 all the way up into Spokane, Washington. And that's where another group of the Aryan Circle would pick it up, and those are the Aryan Knights. The Aryan Knights are very prominent in Idaho and also in eastern Washington. Now, when everything was trafficked over to Spokane, then we've got to get it down to Moscow, to our little neck of the woods in this case. How did we do that? Well, they would have mules from the city of Coeur d'Alene, which you can see is right next to Spokane. Those mules would pick up the narcotics in Spokane and then drive them down State Highway 95 all the way into Moscow. And then they would deliver them to our friends TF and TR there in Moscow. That's where they lived. They would then distribute those things to their local dealers. Their local dealers. Their local dealers would then take them from TF and TR, and then they would go to those colleges there in Moscow and Pullman and distribute it to the youth. Now, with two major colleges and that being the major source for all of the narcotics in the area, I imagine that was a very profitable route that you're seeing on the screen here. Now, we've identified through arrest and public record everything on the screen right here. We've got the over 20 of the folks in the Aryan drug trafficking organization that was arrested in March of 2023. That's the major group. We've got our two mules that were arrested, both muling drugs, who were from Coeur d'Alene. They were both arrested muling the drugs from Spokane down to Moscow. Then we've got our distributors that were arrested right there in Moscow with very high quantities of the drugs. And then we've got our dealers that are admitted dealers right there in Moscow that would deal the drugs to the youth. Then at the bottom, we've got the two outliers. We've got Mr. BK number one, and we've got the other one who's probably not even his real picture. That's just come to light, but still, we're going to call that BK number two. And I'm going to start really pushing the fact that these two were just simple users. But let's continue. When we look at the history, we've got the Quad Cities Drug Task Force is in operation, and then something happens August 21st of 2021. We've got Ms. Kernodle was arrested muling drugs. She was arrested for possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver and possession of a controlled substance. And then in June of 2022, we have Ms. Hatrock, who was also arrested muling drugs, possession of a controlled substance with intent to deliver, possession of a controlled substance, and possession of drug paraphernalia. Now, they're both in the system. Who is going to go straight for them? Because they're trying to figure out how to get to the upper ends of the drug trafficking organization at this point. Well, that's where the Drug Task Force would absolutely ascend on those two. Turning them into informants would lead to major arrests. How are they able to put that kind of pressure? Folks, you got to understand, when the task force is turning somebody into an informant, especially with charges like this, they're sitting down with them, with their attorney, with the prosecutor, and they're all putting pressure on them, telling them things like, your Schedule 2 narcotic has a possible imprisonment of life imprisonment, $25,000 fine, or both. That's the pressure they're putting on them. That's how they turn them into an informant. Did they turn them into informants? Is there any proof of that? Well, you can see right here I've got the Drug Task Force turns them into informants, because here's the proof. Let's look at their actual sentences. You have to really dig deep to figure this out, folks. You can start over there with Miss Hatrock. You can see that it says she got 3 to 4 years in the penitentiary, right? That never happened. Look at her charges. Look at her details right here. What kind of confinement did she have? You can see over there at Miss Kernodle's confinement, it says state prison. No, not Miss Hatrock. It says county jail. Kootenai County Public Safety Building for a discretionary term of 90 days. That 3 to 4 years never happened. Look underneath that where it says penitentiary suspended, and she got credit for time served. 90 days was her sentence, and she was out of that public safety building in Kootenai County. She was an informant, folks. There is no doubt. Now let's look at Miss Kernodle. She was sentenced to state prison 2 to 3 years. But look, you can see it says retained jurisdiction for 365 days. And look at the condition at the bottom. That's not 2 to 3 years in prison. That's felony probation for 3 years, starting 2/2/24 to 6/21 of 23. Neither one of them got a second of prison time, folks. Those are informants. There's your proof. Now, let's look at what happens next, because now we're getting into public record. On September 13th, it became public knowledge that Kernodle made a deal. All right, this one goes out to the drug trafficking organizations. Everybody knows it. And then the very next day, what happens? Well, we got TF and TR arrested on those very serious drug trafficking charges right there in Moscow. Over a pound of METH, 30 F pills. I mean, this was a big time bust. These are big time dealers. And we didn't realize how big time it was until we start digging into who they are. And you can see TF right here. He's identified through his response to a Facebook post where you see he says ACAB. At first, I thought that meant all cops are BASTARDS, a slogan used by the white supremacists. But it turns out what that ACAB is, that's him declaring that he is Aryan Circle, Aryan Brotherhood. Now it gets serious. They just informed on a member of the Aryan Circle. Now, their residence there in Moscow, you can see 815 North Cleveland Street, is as the crow flies, as they say. It's about a mile from the King Road residence right there in Moscow as well. Now, what happened to them? You can see from a news release on December 2nd that on October 21st, that TF was actually released from custody on a furlough by Magistrate Judge Megan Marshall. And he never returned on that furlough, and the warrant was issued for his arrest. He was picked up December 2nd in Spokane, up there where the Aryan Knights are located. So where was he at between October 21st and December 2nd? Those are some important times, aren't there? Then on November 11th, we got Miss Hatrock's court date finally came due, and now it's public knowledge that everybody knows she made a deal as well. So they had a major Aryan Circle distributor arrested in Moscow, and within days of that, we have the two mules that worked for them turned evidence and became public knowledge of their plea deals. It's all but over at this point. When we look at the timeline and you see how it lays out, it's almost shocking. We got the Quad City Drugs Task Force in operation. Kernodle and Hatrock are arrested. The task force gets with them, turns them. On September 13th, her plea deal becomes public knowledge. September 14th, TF and TR are arrested. They set them up. October 21st, they're released from Latah County Jail, one on bond, the other one on furlough. And then on the 11th, Hatrock's deal becomes public knowledge. What happens next? Well, now we've got to get into the major organization on this, because they're the ones who called the shots on this, folks, not the little local guys. Now, this is just interesting. I just put this in here just so I could show you. This is not the Aryan Brotherhood. This is actually the Aryan Nations. Where did they come from? You can see they were started in the 1970s, and they originated in Kootenai County, Idaho. What are the odds? Now, the Brotherhood, which is the Aryan Nation, there's certain ways you can identify them. They have tattoos, and they also have symbols and sayings. They also use hand signs. But the way to identify an AB member is with a shamrock or the number 666. Swastikas or the double lightning bolt, which stands for Hitler's SS. So anytime you hear somebody say 666, check around. Is there a shamrock or a double lightning bolt? Because then you might want to be aware of who their allegiances are really to. Now, how does the AB organization actually operate? You can see AB leaders. They're able to organize major criminal activities, including ordering people's unalivings despite their isolation in prison. In many cases, officials say they do this through either their wives or their girlfriends, or in some cases, they've been known to do this through their lawyers. So even though they're in prison and they're running the show, their people on the outside, they're able to get messages to them. And when they get messages to them, those people have to adhere to the leadership in the prison. How does the hierarchy work? How does that leadership really operate? You can see there's different ranks. There's enforcers, there's shot callers. They issue orders and assignments to members. And there's even commissions known as the ring, the council, or the elders. And if the leadership in the gang is in real control over its members, well, then they can enforce strict adherences to the group's hierarchy as well as its laws and rules. Now, their number one law and rule is do not snitch on a brother. Now, let's talk about the different sects, because this is what we're talking about. All right, you can see the Aryan Circle, which is that prominent group that was taken down up there in Washington that we're assigning to this case. And the Aryan Circle, they're actually identified by their numbers. 1 and 3 stands for A and C, the Aryan Circle. So the number 13, when it comes up, you know it has something to do with the Aryan Circle. Now the Aryan Knights, that's another sect of the Aryan Circle, but they're out of Idaho. And there are, see how many people are part of the Aryan Knights? They're estimated about 150 members behind bars and more than 100 members on the streets. Now you want to know an example of the Aryan Knights, folks? You've probably seen this a few months back. These are 2 members of the Aryan Knights of Idaho. These are the ones that were escaped from prison and they were looking for 36 hours. Take a good look at them. Does that seem like people you want to have on your bad side? Not me. Now, what about the motto? See, when people snitch or do something against the Brotherhood, this is their motto. This is their creed. And it's GFBD. And that's God forgives, brothers don't. Now, how do they send their messages? You see, for the Brotherhood, unaliving is a way to make a social statement. All right, so we talk about why the message would be so brutal. It says right here, this is what happens in the prison yard. We're going to butcher him in front of God and everybody at high noon in the middle of the yard. And it's not going to be just a few clean stab marks. It's going to be a vicious, brutal unaliving. And that's how brothers, AB members, take care of business. And you can see it says a brother's work is never done. Again, AC, first and third letters, Aryan Circle, number 13, folks. What date did this thing take place on? That was a predetermined date. So let's go back to the map now that we know who we're dealing with. Again, you got the Aryan Circle up there in Seattle and Tacoma. They're running it. Sending the narcotics to the Aryan Knights. The 2 mules from Coeur d'Alene bring it down to TF and TR in Moscow, and then they distribute it to their dealers, which then goes to the colleges. So when we look at this, if you need the 11 in there for the 1113, it's easy to do. The Aryan Knights, K, number 11. That's the Idaho Aryan Nation chapter of the Aryan Circle. So 1113, that is the calling card, folks. And it's not just a calling card for the informants. It's a calling card for the informants, the law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, drug task force, and anybody else that may inform on them. They want to let them know what will happen. And they do it in a very vicious way so that everybody knows not to do it again. That's why that town is so quiet now, because most of them know this. Now, with that being said, with a predetermined date of the atrocity, they would not have known that Kaylee and Ethan were going to be there. So that absolutely verifies the 2 targets in this were Xana and Maddie. And it was because of the drug task force turning those mothers into informants and setting this domino roll into effect. And it's absolutely terrible what happened to these innocent folks. So, when you look at it that way, you know, for a long time, I had Mr. Koberger, Mr. Kopacka pegged as the hired guns in this case. And no longer can I actually believe that, because once I realized the organization that was truly involved in this, they don't hire out. No, they're the ones that you hire, okay? And they're very boastful of that fact. So they do not hire out. So one thing they are good at, though, they're good at what they do. And they're also good at pointing the finger at somebody else when they do something. In upcoming videos, I'm going to show you how they pointed the finger at not only Mr. Koberger, but mainly at Mr. Kopacka. Now, as I was researching for this video, there was a couple of clips that I had to leave out because YouTube wouldn't let me put them on. But I watched about a 3-hour interview with a guy who spent 40 years in the penitentiary in the Aryan Brotherhood. And once you're in the Brotherhood for a while, he described some of the indoctrination that they would go through and some of the things that they were required to learn. One of the things that they were required to learn was philosophy, like Nietzsche, The Art of War, and also anatomy books, so that when they did unalive somebody, they did it in the right way to where they would actually be unalived. And he even mentioned areas that you focus on, not unaliving people by, poking them in the heart, but doing it under their arms so they're sure to bleed out, their groin if they are a male. That may shed some light on how one of the victims was unalived. We've all heard rumors about that. But these guys know what they're doing when they go in and they do something like that, I assure you. One of the other things that was interesting was one of the major religions in that group, you guessed it, folks, it's Odinism. And when I heard that, I went, man, I'm not going to get into this, the Odinistic ritual stuff, because I would never believe that. I don't believe that at all. But if you do try to tie in law enforcement in this atrocity in any way, well, that Odinist group is probably the most logical way you could tie one or two of them into it in some form or fashion. I'm going to leave that alone, though. I'm going to let Drip Drop break that, because I think he's about to. Now, the other thing that's interesting about the Odin angle is if you do some research, you'll see that knife sheaths are very important in the Odinistic scenarios, and they have meaning. And that's as far as I'll go with that. But thank you for watching. Post your comments, your criticisms, post your thoughts. And until next time, Pavarotti is out.